Atomic Habits by James Clear. A sleepy summary. Drift off while wisdom seeps in. Before we begin, a quiet word. What follows is not meant to replace something, it is meant to point toward it. These pages are a soft lamp held up to a much larger light. James Clear wrote something worth sitting with slowly, in full, with time and attention and the kind of unhurried reading that lets ideas settle all the way down. This summary is only a doorway. It is offered with care and with the genuine hope that something in tonight's listening finds its way into you not as a shortcut, but as an invitation. The whole book is waiting. The real depth lives there in every word he chose and every story he told and every quiet idea he let breathe across a full page. For now, though, let this be enough. Let this be the beginning of something you carry forward in the light of an ordinary tomorrow. Settle in now. Let your shoulders go soft. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest open like they have nowhere to be and nothing to hold. Because tonight we are going to talk about something very gentle, something about the tiny, almost invisible things that, when repeated over and over in the quiet of ordinary days, slowly become the whole shape of a life. We are going to talk about habits. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that require a fanfare or a resolution written in bold letters on New Year's morning, but the small, quiet, almost embarrassingly modest kind. The kind that happen when nobody is watching. The kind that take about 2 minutes. The kind, as James Clear gently and persistently wants you to understand, that are atomic, not because they explode in some dramatic fashion, but because they are the tiniest possible unit of change, and because, like atoms, they are the fundamental building blocks of everything larger. James Clear began writing about habits the way most people begin doing most things, not because he had it all figured out, but because something had happened to him that made him pay close attention to how human beings actually change. When he was in high school, he was hit in the face by a baseball bat, not metaphorically, but literally, a swung bat catching him full in the skull. He was in a coma. He was flown to a hospital. There were seizures. There was a long, uncertain recovery. And when he finally began the slow work of putting himself back together, he had to do it in the most fundamental way, one small action at a time, rebuilding a life that had been shattered, learning to sleep, to study, to show up, to do the next small thing even when the larger picture felt impossibly far away. He went from a young man who had lost nearly everything, who had fallen so far behind his peers that catching up seemed like a fantasy, to someone who graduated at the top of his class, who became a successful writer, who built a newsletter read by millions of people. And he did it not through some single enormous act of will, but through the patient, faithful accumulation of small improvements compounded over years. That word, compounded, is the first word you really need to let settle into your sleepy mind tonight. Compounding, you know it from money, probably. You know that if you put a little money somewhere and let it earn interest, and then that interest earns interest, and then that interest earns interest, over time the numbers grow not in a straight line, but in a curve that bends upward with increasing steepness, until eventually you are earning more in a single year from accumulated growth than you put in at the very beginning. Habits work exactly the same way, says James Clear. A 1% improvement every single day if you could actually sustain it perfectly, would result in you being 37 times better at something over the course of a year. 37 times, not 1.37 times, not 1/3 times, 37 times. The math is almost absurd. It sounds like a motivational poster, but it is just arithmetic, the arithmetic of compounding, applied not to dollars, but to the accumulated effects of small repeated actions on a human life. And here is the thing that makes this comforting rather than pressuring. Here is the thing that makes it a thought worth carrying into sleep rather than a thought that keeps you anxious and awake. You do not need to be 37 times better today. You just need to be 1% better. You just need to make the smallest possible version of the right choice one more time and then go to sleep. The improvement is not in the single action. The improvement is in the direction. The improvement is in showing up again when the choice comes around. Now, there is something important James Clear wants you to understand before he gets into the mechanics of how habits actually form and change, and that is the distinction between goals and systems. Most of us, when we want to change something about our lives, set a goal. We say, I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to write a novel. I want to save $10,000. I want to run a marathon. And we aim ourselves at the goal, and sometimes we hit it and sometimes we do not. And if we do hit it, we often find, to our bewilderment, that we drift back to where we started, because the goal was a destination, but we never actually changed the road we were traveling on. Goals are about the results you want to achieve, says James Clear. Systems are about the processes that lead to those results. And here is the quiet, slightly unsettling truth he offers. Winners and losers often share the same goals. Every runner at the Olympics wants to win a gold medal. What separates them is not the goal. What separates them is the system of daily training and recovery and preparation that only some of them have built and sustained. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Let that drift over you gently as your breathing slows. Goals, he points out with a kind of patient clarity, create a strange relationship with your own happiness. When your happiness is conditional on achieving the goal, when you tell yourself, I will be satisfied when I have lost the weight, when I have finished the book, when I have the money, you are postponing your own contentment until some future moment that may or may not arrive. And if the goal is achieved, the satisfaction is often brief, and then you need a new goal to keep the dissatisfaction at bay. But if your happiness is connected to the system, if you find genuine satisfaction in the process of daily improvement, in the identity of being someone who shows up and does the work, then you are happy along the way. Every single day you follow the system, you win. You do not have to wait for the finish line to feel that you are on the right path. Which brings us to the deepest and most quietly revolutionary idea in the whole book, the one that James Clear returns to again and again like a patient teacher circling back to make sure the lesson has really landed. The real power of habits is not what they achieve, but who they make you. Every action you take is a vote, he says. A vote for a type of person. Every time you sit down to write even 100 words, you cast a vote for the identity of being a writer. Every time you put on your running shoes, even if you only walk around the block, you cast a vote for the identity of being someone who exercises. Every time you choose the salad, you cast a vote for the identity of being someone who takes care of their body. You do not need to win every vote. Nobody wins every vote in any election. You just need to win enough of them over time that the identity becomes undeniable, not just to other people, but to yourself. This is identity-based habit formation, and it runs exactly backwards from the way most of us try to change. Most of us focus on outcomes first. I want to achieve this result, so I will do these actions. James Clear suggests flipping that entirely. Start with identity. Start with the person you want to be. Then ask yourself, what would that person do right now? Not dramatically, not forever, not in some grand transformation, just right now, this one time, what would that person do? And do that, and then do it again, and again, and slowly, over months and years, the identity catches up with the actions because you have been casting votes for it, one small choice at a time. Now we come to the mechanism. Now we come to the actual engineering of habits, which James Clear lays out with a clarity and elegance that makes you wonder why nobody explained it quite this plainly before, even though the underlying science has been accumulating for decades. Every habit, he explains, follows a four-stage loop. It always has, it always will, because this is simply how the human brain encodes repeated behaviors. The four stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. And if you understand them, really understand them, in your bones, you can use them to build any habit you want and break any habit that is causing you harm. The cue is the trigger. It is the piece of information that tells your brain that a reward might be available. It might be a time of day, the alarm goes off, and your brain anticipates coffee. It might be a location, you walk into the kitchen, and your brain starts thinking about food. It might be an emotional state, you feel bored or anxious or lonely, and your brain reaches for whatever it has learned to associate with relief. It might be a social context, your friends are having a drink, and your brain lights up in recognition. Cues are everywhere, and your brain is constantly scanning for them, constantly updating its map of what signals predict what rewards. The craving is the motivational force. It is not a desire for the habit itself. You do not crave the action of checking your phone. You crave the feeling that you anticipate will follow. The stimulation, the sense of being caught up, the relief of knowing what is happening. Every craving is really a desire for a change in internal state. This distinction matters because it means that what triggers cravings is different for different people. The same cue will not produce the same craving in every person because we all have different associations, different histories, different emotional landscapes. Your craving is your craving, shaped by every experience you have ever had with a particular reward. The response is the habit itself, the thought or the action you take. Whether or not you actually respond depends on how much friction is involved. If the action is too difficult, too far, too cognitively demanding, you will not do it even if the craving is strong. If the action is easy, automatic, already wired into familiar pathways, you will do it almost without noticing. This is why friction is so important. This is why James Clear spends so much time talking about making good habits easy and bad habits hard. Not because the habits themselves are different, but because we are all always choosing the path of least resistance. And if you design your environment thoughtfully, you can make the path of least resistance the path of good behavior. The reward is the satisfaction. It is what tells your brain that this loop was worth completing, that the cue is worth paying attention to next time, that the action is worth storing as an automatic response. The reward has two jobs. It satisfies the craving in the moment, and it teaches the brain for the future. If the reward is strong and reliable, the habit solidifies quickly. If it is weak or inconsistent, the habit remains fragile, easily disrupted, not yet truly automatic. And from these four stages, cue, craving, response, reward, James Clear derives four laws, which are simply practical instructions for working with each stage. To build a good habit, make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response easy, make the reward satisfying. To break a bad habit, make the cue invisible, make the craving unattractive, make the response difficult, make the reward unsatisfying. These four laws and their inverses are the entire practical architecture of the book, laid out in four long chapters that walk through each one in careful, story-rich, example-dense detail. But let us walk through them now slowly, in the way that allows them to settle into you rather than demand anything of you. The first law for building good habits is to make the cue obvious. This sounds almost trivially simple, and yet it is behind so many of the quiet failures of well-intentioned behavior change. People who want to take their vitamins forget to take their vitamins because the vitamins are in a cabinet under the bathroom sink. If the vitamins were on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, next to the thing you definitely do every morning, you would take them. The cue, the vitamins themselves, sitting there in plain sight, would catch your attention at exactly the right moment. James Clear calls this implementation intention, the strategy of deciding in advance not just what you will do, but when and where you will do it. Research shows, he says, that writing down, "I will do X at time Y in location Z," dramatically increases the likelihood of actually doing it, compared to simply intending to do it at some vague point in the future. The specificity of the plan is what makes the cue recognizable when it arrives. He also introduces what he calls habit stacking, which is perhaps the most immediately usable idea in the whole book. Habit stacking is this. You identify a habit you already have, a reliable, daily, automatic behavior, making coffee, brushing your teeth, sitting down at your desk, picking up your phone to check messages, and you use that existing habit as the cue for the new habit you want to build. The formula is simply, after I do this thing I already always do, I will do this new thing I want to start doing. After I pour my morning coffee, I will write in my journal for 5 minutes. After I sit down at my desk, I will review my to-do list. After I get into bed, I will read for 10 minutes. The existing habit is already wired, already automatic, already happening every day whether you think about it or not. It is a scaffold. You hang the new habit on it, and the scaffold holds it up while the new habit finds its own footing. And beyond intention and stacking, James Clear talks about environment design, about the way the spaces we live and work in either support or undermine the habits we want. He tells the story of Anne Thorndike, a physician at Massachusetts General Hospital who redesigned the cafeteria layout so that water was placed where soda used to be at eye level at the checkout at every station, and without changing any menus, without running any campaigns, simply by changing what was most visible and most reachable, she dramatically increased water consumption and decreased soda consumption. The people were not trying harder. They were just responding to cues. The environment had been redesigned to make the better choice the obvious choice. James Clear encourages you to think of yourself as the designer of your own environment. Put the book on the pillow. Put the guitar on a stand in the middle of the room, not in the case in the closet. Put the fruit in a bowl on the counter and the cookies in a container on a high shelf. Put the running shoes by the door. Put the phone in a different room when it is time to focus. You are not testing your willpower. You are not relying on motivation, which comes and goes like weather. You are designing a landscape that works with your brain rather than against it, that makes the cue for the behavior you want impossible to miss, and the cue for the behavior you are trying to reduce invisible and inconvenient. The second law for building good habits is to make the craving attractive. This is the law that operates on desire, on the anticipation that precedes action. James Clear explains the neuroscience here in just enough detail to be illuminating without being overwhelming. Dopamine, the famous pleasure chemical, is released not only when you experience a reward, but when you anticipate one. The anticipation, in fact, often produces a larger dopamine spike than the reward itself, which is why the checking of notifications feels so compulsive even when the notifications themselves are usually disappointing, why gambling is so hard to stop even when you are mostly losing, why the thought of a piece of chocolate is almost as good as the piece of chocolate, and sometimes better. Your brain is built to want, not just to have. The wanting is the engine. Temptation bundling is one of James Clear's suggestions for working with this truth. The idea is to pair an action you need to do, but do not particularly want to do with an action you want to do, but perhaps should not do exclusively. Only listen to your favorite podcast while exercising. Only watch the show you love while folding laundry. Only allow yourself to browse certain enjoyable corners of the internet while doing a particular administrative task. You are manufacturing a craving, a genuine anticipatory pleasure, around a behavior that needs to happen, by bundling it with something that already produces that pleasure. The dopamine of the thing you want bleeds into the thing you need, and suddenly the thing you need is something your brain begins to look forward to. He also talks about social influence, which is a profound and ancient force in habit formation that we often underestimate because we like to think of ourselves as independent agents making rational choices. We are not really. We are deeply, inescapably social creatures who have evolved to look around and calibrate our behavior to what the people around us are doing, especially the people we admire and want to belong to. We imitate the close, the people nearest to us, our family, our friends, our colleagues. We imitate the many, the majority, the norm, the thing that seems to be what everyone does. And we imitate the powerful, those we look up to, those who have achieved what we want, those whose approval we seek. To build a habit, surround yourself with people for whom that habit is normal. If you want to read more, find people who read. If you want to exercise, spend time with people who exercise. If you want to be creative, find a community of creators. The identity of the group becomes a powerful cue and a powerful craving. You do not just want to have the habit, you want to belong. The third law, make the response easy, is the one where the actual mechanics of daily behavior come into sharpest focus, and it is perhaps the one that runs most directly against the conventional wisdom about self-improvement. We tend to think that the key to changing behavior is motivation, that if you just want it badly enough, if you just commit hard enough, you will do it. James Clear respectfully but firmly disagrees. Motivation is unreliable. It is emotional weather. It rises and falls, and you cannot plan your life around its peaks, and you will certainly not always have it for the habits that matter most. What you need is not motivation, but ease. You need to reduce the friction between you and the behavior until the behavior requires so little activation energy that it can happen almost automatically, even on the days when motivation is nowhere to be found. He talks about the 2-minute rule, which is so simple it almost sounds like a joke, until you sit with it and realize it is perhaps the most practical piece of advice in the entire book. Any habit you want to build can be started as a 2-minute version of itself. Want to read before bed? Read 1 page. Want to practice meditation? Sit quietly for 2 minutes. Want to exercise every day? Put on your workout clothes and do 2 minutes of movement. Want to study a new language? Open the app and do 1 exercise. The 2-minute version is not the whole habit. It is the gateway habit, the ritual of beginning that makes the rest possible. Because the hardest part of almost any task is starting. Once you have started, momentum carries you. Once you have started, the friction of continuing is much lower than the friction of beginning was. The 2-minute rule removes the hardest barrier. It makes showing up so easy that you almost cannot fail. He also discusses what he calls decisive moments, the small choices that seem minor in themselves, but that determine which path you are on for the next hour or the next day. Choosing to open the laptop or the television. Choosing to order the delivery or to cook. Choosing to sit on the couch or to lace up the shoes. These moments are not the whole story, but they determine which story gets told. They are forks in the road that lead to very different places, and they happen in a flash, often before we are fully conscious of them as choices. Being aware of them, building habits that automate the better choice at those decisive moments, is how you build a life rather than just letting one happen to you. And there is the concept of the environment as the designer of ease, the commitment device, the choice architecture, the small infrastructural decision that makes the right behavior the default. James Clear tells the story of Victor Hugo, who, desperately behind on the manuscript of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, asked his assistant to lock away all of his clothes except a large shawl, so that he literally could not leave the house and be social, and was forced, by the simple removal of an option, to sit down and write. This is a commitment device, a deliberate choice made in advance, in a clear-headed moment, that restricts your future options in order to protect your future behavior from your future impulses. Putting your phone in a box in another room is a commitment device. Signing up for a class in advance is a commitment device. Meal prepping on Sunday is a commitment device. You are not testing your willpower in the moment. You are removing the test altogether by making the decision before the moment arrives. The 4th law, make the reward satisfying, addresses the last stage of the habit loop, the moment of completion, the signal that tells your brain this loop was worth completing and should be completed again. James Clear points out something that should feel obvious when you say it, but is actually rather counterintuitive in practice. The human brain is wired to prioritize immediate rewards over delayed ones. The costs and benefits that come immediately are weighted much more heavily than the costs and benefits that come in the future, even when the future benefits are much larger. This is what he calls the cardinal rule of behavior change. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. And this creates a fundamental design challenge for almost all the good habits we want to build, because most good habits have immediate costs and delayed rewards, while most bad habits have immediate rewards and delayed costs. Exercise is uncomfortable now and produces a fitter body months from now. Eating well requires resisting pleasure now and produces better health years from now. Saving money requires deprivation now and provides security in a future that feels abstract. And meanwhile, scrolling your phone is immediately pleasurable. Eating the cookie is immediately pleasant. Spending the money feels good right now. To solve this, James Clear recommends making the rewards of good habits feel good immediately, even before the deeper rewards arrive. Keep a habit tracker, a simple calendar, a simple app, a simple notebook where you make a mark each day you complete the habit. The mark itself is an immediate reward. The chain of marks is an immediate reward. The psychological satisfaction of not breaking the streak is an immediate reward. He calls this the never miss twice rule, not that you must never miss a day, because life happens and perfection is fragile, but that you commit to never missing 2 days in a row. Miss once, fine. Everyone misses once, but come back the next day no matter what and keep the identity intact. The first miss is an accident. The second miss is the beginning of a new habit. He also suggests habit contracts, a written agreement with yourself and ideally with someone else, in which you specify the habit, the frequency, and the consequence if you fail to follow through. Having a social accountability partner, someone who knows your commitment and will notice if you break it, dramatically increases the likelihood of following through, because the social cost of breaking the habit becomes an immediate cost rather than a distant abstraction. You are not just letting yourself down in some vague future way. You are letting down a specific person who is watching, and that is a very immediate and very motivating kind of discomfort. Now let your mind soften further, because we are moving into some of the deeper and more nuanced ideas in the book. Ideas about advanced levels of habit mastery, about talent and genetics, and finding the right habits for you, about the dangers of automation and the importance of staying fresh. These are the ideas that James Clear explores in the second half of the book, after the 4 laws have been established, and they are the ideas that distinguish this book from a simple self-help manual and make it something a little more philosophically complete. He begins by asking a question that most habit books never bother with: which habits are actually right for you? Not which habits are right for some idealized version of a productive human being, not which habits are right for the high performers whose lives we admire from a distance, but which habits suit the particular person you are, with the particular strengths and tendencies and temperament and physical and neurological makeup that you were born with and have been shaped by. Because not every habit is equally suited to every person. And the place where habits flourish most effortlessly is the place where they align with who you naturally are. James Clear talks about genetics and temperament, not in a deterministic, you are what your genes say way, but in a realistic, you are not starting from zero way. People differ in personality traits, in what psychologists call the Big Five: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These traits are substantially heritable, substantially stable across a lifetime, and substantially relevant to which environments and which activities feel natural and rewarding rather than forced and exhausting. An extrovert and an introvert can both build habits, but the introvert should probably not build habits that require extensive daily social performance, because the energy cost will be so high that the habits will be fragile. An extrovert should probably not build habits that require extended solitary focus for the same reason. You are not fighting against who you are, you are designing with who you are. The key question he suggests is, what feels like fun for you but work for everyone else? Because the activities that fall at the intersection of your natural abilities and your genuine interests are the ones where habit building will feel least effortful and most sustainable, where the rewards will be most natural, where the identity will form most easily. This does not mean only doing easy things. It means being intelligent about where you invest your habit-building energy, choosing the terrain where you have a natural advantage rather than the terrain where you are perpetually fighting uphill. Explore broadly at first, he says, try many things, pay attention to what feels like fun, what makes time pass without noticing, what you return to voluntarily rather than under obligation. Then narrow in, commit to the things that suit you. He also talks about the Goldilocks rule, the idea that human motivation peaks when you are working on tasks that are right at the edge of your current ability. Not too easy, because easy is boring and your attention drifts away. Not too hard, because too hard is discouraging and you shut down. Just right, challenging enough to require engagement, achievable enough that success is possible with effort. The sweet spot, he says, is roughly 4% beyond your current ability, close enough to the edge that you have to stretch, far enough from failure that you can succeed. This is the zone of maximum engagement, the zone of what Csikszentmihalyi called flow, the zone where you are fully present in what you are doing, because what you are doing requires everything you currently have. Keeping habits fresh at this level of challenge requires what James Clear calls the principle of continuous improvement, the deliberate practice of noticing what is working and what is not, of reviewing and revising the system rather than simply repeating it indefinitely. He talks about his own practice of an annual review, a mid-year review, a periodic honest assessment of what habits are serving him and which have become counterproductive or simply irrelevant. He points out something important. Success can be as dangerous to growth as failure in a certain way, because success produces confidence, and confidence can tip into overconfidence, into the complacency of assuming that what worked yesterday will always work tomorrow. The person who is good at something has often stopped exploring the edges of what is possible, has stopped asking questions, has stopped being a beginner. Staying a beginner, maintaining curiosity, maintaining humility, Maintaining the willingness to question your own established patterns is one of the hardest and most important habits of all. He also writes about what he calls the downside of good habits, the paradox that automation, which is one of the great benefits of habit formation, can eventually lead to mindlessness. Once something is fully automatic, you stop paying close attention to it. And that is mostly fine. It is the point, actually, but it means you can miss the moment when the habit needs to evolve, when the environment has changed, when what was a good fit has become a bad one. The solution is not to avoid building habits, but to add a layer of deliberate reflection to the automaticity. To practice the habit automatically and then periodically to step back and look at it consciously, ask whether it still serves you, ask whether it could be refined or improved or replaced. Habits plus reflection equals mastery. Habits without reflection is just going through the motions. And now let us begin the long, gentle return to where we started, to the central, quietly beautiful idea that runs underneath everything else in this book like a deep and steady current. You are not trying to become perfect. You are not trying to achieve some final, fixed destination after which you will have no more habits to build and no more growth to pursue. You are not trying to reach a point where the work is done. You are trying to become the kind of person who shows up, who does the small thing, who casts the vote over and over for the identity they have chosen, because they understand that the identity is not something you are born with or that falls on you from outside, but something you build with your hands, with your choices, with your tiny repeated actions in the quiet of ordinary days. Every morning you wake up, you are presented with exactly this choice. What small thing will you do today that is consistent with the person you want to be? Not the grand thing. Not the thing that requires ideal conditions and perfect motivation and a long uninterrupted stretch of time. The small thing, the thing that takes 2 minutes, the thing that, in the context of a single day, seems almost too small to matter. The thing that, in the context of a year, has moved the mountains of your life without you noticing the movement, until you look back and realize that you are somewhere entirely different from where you started. And the change happened not in one dramatic leap, but in 10,000 tiny steps, each one so small as to be nearly invisible, each one contributing its fraction of a percent to a transformation that, from the inside, felt like nothing much, and from the outside, looks like everything. Atomic habits, the smallest possible unit of change, the building block of everything, not the big dramatic life overhaul, not the January resolution that requires a completely different version of yourself to sustain. Just the next small right action. Just the next vote cast for the identity you are choosing. Just the habit stacked onto the habit that is already there. Just the cue made obvious and the craving made attractive, and the response made easy and the reward made satisfying. Just the 2-minute version of the thing. Just the open running shoes by the door and the book on the pillow and the journal beside the coffee maker. Just the system that runs even when motivation does not show up. Just the gentle and faithful accumulation of 1% improvements in the direction of the life you want. James Clear ended up becoming the kind of person he wanted to be, a writer, an athlete, a thoughtful and methodical builder of a deliberate life, not by being extraordinary, not by having some special willpower the rest of us lack, but by understanding the architecture of habits well enough to work with them rather than against them. He made the right things easy. He made the wrong things hard. He built an environment that supported the person he wanted to become rather than the person he used to be. He tracked his habits and felt the satisfaction of not breaking the chain. He missed sometimes and came back the next day. He reviewed and revised and stayed curious and stayed humble and kept showing up day after day for habits so small that on any individual day they barely seem to matter, but that over years compounded into a life that from the outside looks like extraordinary self-discipline and from the inside mostly just feels like doing the next small thing. You have everything you need. You have always had everything you need. You do not need more motivation. You do not need a better version of yourself to start with. You do not need conditions to be perfect or timing to be right. You need a cue, something obvious, something you will see or hear or feel at exactly the right moment. You need a craving, something that makes the habit feel like it is moving you towards something you actually want, even if the connection is not obvious at first. You need a response, something easy enough that even a tired, unmotivated, busy version of you can do it. And you need a reward, something that makes your brain say yes, that felt good, let us do that again. And when you have those four things in place, the habit begins to build itself slowly without fanfare, without your needing to white-knuckle it through every repetition. It just runs, it just happens, it just accumulates. Day after day, the small good thing adding itself to yesterday's small good thing, building toward a sum that is larger than you can see from where you are standing today. Somewhere in you right now, as you are drifting towards sleep, a change is already happening. The neurons are doing their patient work. The synaptic pathways are strengthening or weakening, encoding the patterns of the day, consolidating what was experienced and chosen and practiced into the long-term architecture of who you are. Sleep itself is part of the process. Memory consolidation happens in sleep. Skill acquisition happens in sleep. The brain's daily maintenance and organization and repair happens in sleep. You are not pausing your growth right now. You are continuing it. In the most fundamental biological sense, going to sleep is itself a habit worth building and protecting, a cornerstone habit that supports all other habits, because the brain that is well rested is the brain that can make better choices, feel more motivation, experience more discipline, see its options more clearly, resist its impulses more successfully. Sleep is not a break from becoming who you want to be. Sleep is part of how you become who you want to be. So let this be the last thought that finds you before sleep takes you fully. You do not have to be better tomorrow than you were today. You just have to be 1% better. And actually, you do not even have to manage that tonight. Tonight, you just have to rest. Tonight, the only habit that matters is the one of letting yourself stop, of putting down the doing and the striving and the reviewing and the planning, and letting your body and your mind have the deep, quiet repair that they need in order to show up tomorrow and do the next small thing. Tonight, the whole ambitious, patient, quietly revolutionary project of building a better life is paused, gently and properly, so that tomorrow it can resume with a mind that is clear and a body that is rested and a spirit that is, if you have been doing this for long enough, a little bit lighter and a little bit more hopeful than it was before, because it has started to notice, quietly, slowly, without making a big deal of it, that the small things are adding up, that the direction is right, that the person it is becoming is already someone it recognizes and respects, one small thing at a time, one vote at a time, 1% at a time. The system running quietly, the identity forming slowly, the life building itself out of the accumulated weight of 1,000 ordinary moments that nobody else would notice and that, taken individually, mean almost nothing, but that together, compounded over years and years of faithful small effort, mean everything. That is the atomic habit. That is the whole book. That is the whole beautiful, patient, revolutionary idea. One small thing, then sleep. Good night, rest well. The habits will be there tomorrow.